Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the 2022 Astrology Forecast Part 2. My name is Kristen Avalos, and if you haven't watched Part 1, I highly suggest that you do that first. I will leave the link for that video below. But I will be covering going over just a few things that I covered in part one, but part one is the foundation for everything that I'll be continuing to talk about in this part two and part three. Again, I have a PowerPoint slide or a Canvas slide here for you, but if you are just listening, know that you can just listen through, but you might gain some more insight from seeing some of the photos that I have on the slides. Just for a couple of the slides, it might be helpful. Other than that, I am so glad that you're back. How did you like part one? If you thought that part one was a little bit intense, then I will definitely give you a warning for part two, because part two is going to go pretty deep down before we start to see the light at the end. But definitely stick around for the whole thing. Take deep breaths when you need to throughout the process. Do a little tapping. If you find yourself getting, finding that some of this information might be a little much, but don't let that scare you from gaining the insights of what we can expect to happen in the year ahead. Again, about me, my name is Kristen Avalos. I am a spiritual mindset coach, and my philosophy as a spiritual mindset coach is that personal growth is a path to your life purpose, and that challenges are a path to your fullest potential. And you have choice, your ability to choose as a tool to learn. Now, as a student and teacher of evolutionary astrology, which again, I will say that I am self-taught. I've been studying astrology for about 13 years now, and there is always new information to learn. But essentially, my philosophy is that astrology is helping us to evolve, and that our collective consciousness, what is happening around us, is really a mirror of the individual consciousness that is in part patterned by our blueprint, our birth chart that we come into this lifetime with, as well as the way that the planets are affecting our birth chart throughout our lifetime and lifetimes. And I do believe that the personal healing, which comes through learning about ourselves and getting in touch with the deeper aspects of ourselves, is a way to get to a state of higher consciousness. And that is a ripple effect that can even impact different timelines and planetary dimensions. I believe that you are a sovereign being of light. I believe that you have divinity within you and that you came to this lifetime for a specific purpose. I said that in part one, and I'll say it again. You are here to heal your karma, which just means to make things right and to continue to evolve into a more conscious and creative being. So thank you for being here with me now. Thank you for being here during the times that we are living in. I feel that if you are here with me listening to this, then we are in this together. And I thank you for being in this battle that we're in. So what you're going to learn in part 2, again, I'm going to touch on the bigger picture that I talked about in part 1, which is the shifting from the age of Pisces to the age of Aquarius. And this is a very Pisces, Neptune heavy section. So I'm going to talk about it again just because it is so relevant to what I'll be talking about in this specific part 2. I'll be talking about the rose-colored glasses of Neptune and Jupiter in Pisces, which we will see in 2022 and which we have been dealing with already in 2021. I'm going to be talking about psychosis and awakening. We have America's Neptune opposition taking place in February of this year. And then finally, I'll be talking about moving beyond limitations when we get into Jupiter moving into Aries. So if you're ready to get started, let's go. Again, knowledge is power. Curiosity is king. Knowing or having an understanding or the more objective knowledge that astrology gives has demonstrated to be an accurate way to look at the cycles of what is going on our planet for humanity. We are being controlled by these patterns, not in a way that we don't have free will, but astrologer Robert Fitzgerald said that he believes these patterns may even be an integral part of our very DNA, our genetic structure. And the history of how we got here to this moment has been orchestrated by astrology and by these powerful cycles that have been occult or hidden or secret for many years. But if you tap into the power of these cycles, and if you have the intention to do good and to help to bring the planet to a higher spiritual level, think of the change that could happen if all of us or enough of us start to do that, because that is what's needed for the next part of our journey. So again, the shifting of ages, the bigger perspective of what's really going on here with this greater change. This is a 2100 year cycle, this shifting of the ages, and the progression of the zodiac with these ages actually goes backwards. So from Pisces, which is the 12th sign of the zodiac, we're moving into the 11th sign, which is Aquarius. But for 2100 years, we have been in this massive building and shifting and changing related to the Pisces themes of religion and spirituality. And again, as I mentioned, this has been a cycle that has been, whether it's having to do with war or love or whatever you're talking about, we're talking about this dynamic of religion and spirituality. We are talking about the arts and creativity, culture. We're talking about illusions and delusions. We're talking about emotions. And, you know, Pisces is a water sign, and emotions can sometimes turn into addictions if they're not felt and processed. And interestingly, Pisces also rules mental institutions, hospitals, prisons. And since 1980, we have been in the era of Pisces as well, which is a smaller cycle of about 250 years that's going to be continuing on until 2160. And again, we're in the final stretch of this 2100-year cycle, which many of us won't even be around to see, though maybe with Aquarius, there might be more of us around than you might think. But we are in that final stage, the prophecy and revelation stage that we hear so much about in religions. And the religions of our time have been about this idea of good versus evil, this duality. Pisces, the fish, the yin and the yang. So the question is, as we move into the age of Aquarius, is it possible to move forward with peace, to move forward and have a civilization that lives without war? Is that possible? And maybe it's the only way possible. Now let's talk about Neptune in Pisces. And again, there is power in being able to see, to truly see and see beyond the veil, so to speak, to see beyond illusions. And Neptune and Pisces, it started in Pisces February 3rd of 2012 and will be in Pisces until March 30th of 2025. So again, Neptune is a slow moving planet. This is a generational planet, and it is at home as the ruler of Pisces. And I think, although it could be a great thing when we always think, oh, well, if a planet is at home, then good things are going to happen. But what tends to happen when a sign is in its home on a collective level is we are really, if there are shadows to be played out, then we're seeing the shadow side first. And so again, like I said, this decade generational phase with Neptune, it spends about 13 years in each sign, and we are getting a clearer idea about the illusions and delusions that are part of our daily lives. We're getting really tuned into our unconscious and subconscious minds, and again, what that means as it deals with the collective, and this idea of good versus evil coming out. And then in 2022, we're going to have Neptune retrograde, which means it's slowing down and we're really starting to tune into the messages on a deeper level. It will be retrograde from June 28th of 2022 until December 4th. So almost half of the year we'll have Neptune going over points that it already has gone over before. So a lot more introspection, and I would say things aren't completely over. I don't think we have the full story about a lot, because Neptune's mission, as astrologer Nikki Halstead wrote, Neptune's mission is in Pisces is to awaken, to slowly make us aware of deception so we no longer fall prey to it. This could be the ways in which we deceive ourselves and others, or how others and outside influence deceive us. And this emphasis here is mine. Once illusions and misperceptions fall away, we are left with the truth. And natural law expert Mark Passio says, the fact of the matter is that truth, by its very nature, is belligerent, because it is actually at war. It's at war with the lie. It's at war with deception. It's at war with mind control. Let me introduce you, speaking of mind control, to this gentleman here, if you don't already know, is Edward Bernays. He's known as the father of propaganda. And he was around in the, active career-wise. He lived until he was about 103, but really got his foot on the ground career-wise in the 20s. So this is sort of after World War I, yet before World War II began. And he wrote the books Propaganda. He wrote the book Crystallizing Public Opinion, which you see on the screen. And he said, again, if you've studied, communications or public relations, you've probably heard about Edward Bernays. He's sort of like, that's like communications 101. And he said, and again, this is back in the 20s, the conscious and intelligent manipulation of organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in a democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. And so here you'll see, this is the book Propaganda, written in 1923. And literally on the front cover of the book, it lists the word propaganda and gives the key points about propaganda on the cover. So I'll just read to you a few of them. Only through the active energy of intelligent few can the public at large become aware of and act upon new ideas. Propaganda bears the same relation to education as to business or politics. It may be abused. It may be used to over-advertise an institution and to create in the public mind artificial values. There can be no absolute guarantee of its misuse. He goes on to say on the front cover, a presidential candidate may be, quote, drafted in response to, quote, overwhelming popular demand, end quote, but it is well known that his name may be decided by half a dozen men. Again, let me emphasize, this was written in 1923 and was a tool for the propaganda used by the Nazis. It's, you can't make this stuff up. And so the idea is this: agenda setting takes place. So there's an agenda, there is the perception of reality that the agenda creates, and then there's actual reality. And this image here is from the article by Vigilant Citizen titled "The Elite Machine Behind Greta Thunberg." And Vigilant Citizen says, agenda setting is the creation of public awareness and concern of salient issues by the news media. As well, agenda setting describes the way the media attempts to influence viewers and establish a hierarchy of news prevalence. And I highly suggest that you read that article because it's really eye-opening. Now, back to my dear friend, he's not really my friend and he's passed away, G. Edward Griffin, who wrote The Creature of Jekyll Island. He says this: the first consideration in finding a suitable threat to serve as a global enemy was that it did not have to be real, provided the masses could be convinced it was real. The public will more readily believe some fictions than others. Credibility will be more important than truth. And if you can look at the screen, and I think we all can think of times when we have given power away by someone simply because we thought that they had more knowledge than us, they had more money than us, and we never stopped to think if they had our best interest in mind. So that's the point that I'm really trying to drive home when we're dealing with this Neptunian version of reality. So will symbolism be their downfall? And again, when you look at the media, which is part of the realm of Pisces, there is a message and an agenda being pushed. This article with Greta here is titled "Our World, Our Future." So again, they're trying, the agenda is, what is this new world going to look like? And it's quite dark if you are paying attention. It's a little bit scary, and there's different agendas in all of these photos that are being pushed. And again, they're really giving us clues and giving us information to make us familiar with the path that they would like us to go down. The definition of this phenomenon has been stated by Alan Watt. Predictive programming is a subtle form of psychological conditioning provided by the media to acquaint the public with planned societal changes to be implemented by our leaders. If and when these changes are put through, the public will already be familiarized with them and will accept them as natural progressions, thus lessening possible public resistance and commotion. So let's see this. Fake news. Again, this is a quote from Edward Bernays in Propaganda. And another interesting connection is that Edward Bernays, father of propaganda, his uncle was none other than Sigmund Freud, father of psychology. So they were definitely working together with their ideas. And if you look into the history of who was, funding them, again, like I said in part one, this is definitely, we have to look at that concept of follow the money. So Bernays says in Propaganda, we are governed, our minds are molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men we have never heard of. We are dominated by a relatively small number of persons, a trifling fraction of our 120 million, who understand the mental processes and social patterns of the masses. It is they who pull the wires which control the public mind and who harness old social forces and contrive new ways to bind and guide the world. So how many coincidences before it becomes mathematically impossible? So The Simpsons has a lot of predictive programming in it. And I would love to do a full series just on predictive programming in The Simpsons. But here is just one example. And thank you, Kelly, my friend Kelly, for sending me this connection. It's such a great recent example. And again, someone might look at this and say, oh, that's, it's just a coincidence. But when you understand what predictive programming is, what propaganda is, and this concept of mind control, you start to realize that maybe it isn't a coincidence. Maybe they really are putting this out there. And of course, then you have to ask yourself, what is it that they are trying to get me comfortable with? And again, this astral world example is very Piscean as well, with this idea of other dimensions, other worlds, hellish worlds, demons, this idea of demons and all sorts of Piscean themes with this one. Now, we also have Jupiter in Pisces. And as I talked about in part one, Jupiter is an expansive planet, and it will expand upon whatever is there. So lap one with Jupiter in Pisces is December 28th, 2021, and we'll go through May 10th of 2022. And then it's going to retrograde, and then it's going to be back October 28th to December, or no, it's going to go into Aries, and then it will go back into Pisces October 28th to December 20th, 2022. Now, Jupiter is the ancient ruler of Pisces. So before Neptune became the modern ruler, Jupiter was the ruler. And again, while Jupiter is a planet that typically brings blessings, I feel like coupled with Neptune, we could see a lot revealed. I guess that's sort of what I'm gathering from this, which for some people could be a good thing if they're ready to receive that information. For those who maybe aren't as familiar with some of these topics, it could be very jarring. And another little tidbit is that Jupiter rules the media, publishing, again, the idea of expansion, and also law. So that might come into play when we're talking about these themes here. Mark Passio says, many modern institutions like media, like so-called education institutions, are seeking to actually control human perceptions, or let's call it outright what it really is, to control the mind. Therefore, by limiting what they are coming to understand, they're actually limiting what they're able to do, what they are able to change, what they are able to create in the world. And I feel like that's why this is so important to truly see and understand, even though I know it could be a little bit dark and a little bit scary to look at. But we have to understand that the limitations of not understanding this is a big detriment to how humanity is able to move forward as creative sovereign beings. So let's take a look at when Jupiter was in Pisces in August of 1974. We had the Watergate scandal with Nixon. And Dr. John Coleman, in his book, The Conspirator's Hierarchy, said this, again, he wrote this book, I believe in the 90s, said this about Watergate. the Watergate plot was a coup d'etat against the USA, as was the murder of JFK, which in their wake brought the most violent rape and assault on the institutions upon which the Republic of the United States stands. And again, looking at the past, there is the myth of what really happened with the Nixon resignation. And I believe underneath that is the truth, which we can see with clarity after the fog has been lifted. And so in that book, The Conspirators' Hierarchy, Dr. John Coleman speaks specifically to the idea of the global elite, whether it be the Illuminati, CCP, Committee of 300. And here, I have a photo on the screen if you're just listening. We have mind manipulation as part of one of those committees. Now, the Tavistock Institute was specifically created, I believe, right after World War II, which again, remember, we had that Saturn-Pluto conjunction at the end of World War II, and the creation of a lot of these committees that are trying to have a dominant domination over humanity. And an interesting other little tidbit that someone had mentioned on Rise TV during a live I was watching, Tavistock, which is, the mind control arm of this hierarchy scheme, sounds a lot like Travis Scott from Astroworld. So is it possible that that was just a little way to get this out there for our awareness? And definitely take a look. I won't go into this photo in detail, but it does go to show that there is a connection between eugenics and population control, with the environment, with different intelligence agencies. So again, now this is something that isn't out there for public awareness. Again, a very sort of Piscean thing. And I just wanted to share, this is a slide from Robert Phoenix's 11th house on Gaia. And I found this to be one of the most brilliant examples that I have come across in such a long time. And Robert talks about the effects of the Kennedy assassination from the perception of there was an altering of the timeline. So again, as Dr. John Coleman said, there's this idea that a coup d'etat happened. And again, they wanted things to go in a different direction. So that's kind of what this idea of what the alteration of a timeline would be. So by altering the timeline, and I believe that the JFK assassination was one, Watergate was another, there was this ability, and again, this is just sort of a hypothesis, but the inception of the false Aquarian age. And so what is the false Aquarian age? Pseudo Aquarius, as Robert calls it, is surveillance as oneness, poverty as one class, science replaces nature, a green utopia controlled setting, which is something that we are being pushed towards with this whole climate change agenda. And then the whole concept of transhumanism as being a hive mind. So this is false Aquarius. And I believe this is the Aquarius that we do not want to bring in 150 years for our next generations. The true spirit of Aquarius, and one that I think we should be striving to as humanity, in my personal opinion, is freedom of spirit. So that idea of sovereignty, abundance through service, abundance through providing value, and value being something that is not just money and power, but how about the value of being a good listener, being a healer, being an artist, being someone that uh, follows their passions. Where is the value in that in society? Nature being a sacred, life-giving tool that we as humans get to interface with, and our bodies too being sacred. The idea of being healthy sovereigns, yet working together. And then he also mentions this idea of indigenous dream time. So of really connecting with our true natures and our true ancestry and discovering what that is. So thank you, Robert Phoenix. I think this is one of my favorite things that I have heard him talk about. So brilliant. Going back to 1974 with Jupiter and Pisces, Dr. John Coleman says this: the people of this nation fully believed the calumny of lies, distortions, and set piece contrived situations mounted by the conspirator as truth, when in fact, Watergate was a diabolical lie, end to end. He says it is important to stress this because we haven't seen the last of Watergate type operations. And just look at the photo and you see he's absolutely correct. Now, G. Edward Griffin says this: almost all of history is an unbroken trail of one conspiracy after another. He says conspiracies are the norm, not the exception. So for anyone who's sitting listening thinking that this is a bunch of conspiracy, it is. That's what a conspiracy is. This is a conspiracy for sure. So Jupiter and Pisces, a preview events that we had in more recent times was December 28th of 2010, and we had WikiLeaks. So again, I do believe that personally that WikiLeaks is legit. I feel we don't have the full story on it, but this is what even CBS News has reported, that WikiLeaks has brought to light a series of disturbing insinuations and startling truths in the last year, some earth-shattering, others simply confirmations of our darkest suspicions about the way the world works. And again, with Jupiter and Pisces again, will we find out some truth about Julian Assange? Is he alive? Is he dead? What was the truth about what really happened with this information coming to light? Again, what is real and what is not? And then a preview of events even more recently, June 26, 2021, similar to Assange, we had McAfee coming out, releasing 31 terabytes of data. And again, what is this real? Is it, I mean, what kind of shocking discoveries are going to come with this next wave of Jupiter in Pisces, but I definitely think we're going to have some shocking disclosures and maybe even twists of events. When Jupiter was in Pisces May 13th and through July 28th of 2021, here's what the Astro Twins had predicted about that period. They said fantasy may outweigh the restrictions of reality as we push developments to market before they've been thoroughly tested. Between May 13th and July 28th, this could be the case. A cause for concern in a year when jabby jabbos are going through clinical trials. The cure could be worse than the problem. This was their prediction in their 2021 forecast report, which I found to be quite interesting to mention here. And then we have the big doozy, which is America's Neptune opposition. So here's where we have the question. Is this going to be a mass awakening, or are we moving into mass psychosis? And the choice is yours. This is a sort of a red pill, blue pill situation. So the US Neptune opposition will take place on and around February 18th of 2022. So this is the beginning of the year. Oppositions, of course, are tense. Neptune is going to reach 22 degrees Pisces, opposing the US's Neptune in Virgo. So the US birth chart has Neptune on the midheaven in Virgo. So this opposition is something that occurs once every 165 years. Neptune was last in Pisces in the late 1850s, leading up to the US Civil War. And then the last conjunction, again, meaning they're joined, marked the start of World War II on September 1st of 1939. So again, I just want to emphasize in part 3, we will be talking about the Pluto return, which happens every 250 years. But right around the same time in February, we have another major transit taking place for America. This is America's birth chart that doesn't happen except for every 165 years. So again, buckle up. And my question, is this a tale of two presidents again, as it was leading up to the Civil War? So the Astro Twins say, as we approach Neptune's second 22-degree visit to Pisces, we look back to the start of the Civil War, which we began in 1861, as Neptune exited Pisces to begin its quest through Aries. In 2025, Neptune will repeat this cycle. So again, we're in 2022, planets are going to be retrograding over these spots and going forward again. So 2022 is definitely the start of a phase that's going to continue to evolve. So remember to think about it in that way. Astrologer Robert Hand said, we used to believe that Saturn was reality and Neptune is illusion. However, we've come to realize that Neptune is reality and Saturn is the illusion that there was one. So here's what G. Edward Griffin in Creature from Jekyll Island has to say about the Civil War. He said there were powerful forces in Europe that wanted to see America embroiled in a civil war. If she could be split into two hostile countries, there would be less obstacle to European expansion on the North American continent. The issue of slavery was but a ploy. America had become the target in a ruthless game of world economics and politics. And I know that's a big statement that he's making, but again, think of everything we've been talking about and think of where we're at right now and really think about that. And two, America, if its sort of conception was 1776, America was a very young country, just a little babe. So and a very valuable country that had a lot to offer. So it's not out of line to think that there wouldn't be powers that be, especially when the key is control, that would not want to see America split and divided. And again, I only ask you to look around yourself and see this pattern being played out again. And as I talked about in part one, I do believe we are in a ruthless game of world economics and politics right now because of the Saturn Pluto conjunction and all that I talked about in part one. So the Astro Twins say, given the total nature of the sky is a new type of civil conflict upon us, perhaps one that is both digital and algorithmic, not simply an overt demonstration of military or physical force. To answer this profound question, one that we take great caution in advancing, we must acknowledge and consider the Promethean forces of high technology impacting every sphere of human endeavor, including our monetary system. Now, astrologer Robert Fitzgerald's talking back about the Pisces age. He says, all the religions that grew up in this age of Pisces have been religions of duality, entailing a great cosmic war between good and evil, with our personal souls as the battlefields. The enemy now is Satan, the great cosmic god of evil. And to achieve victory, the struggle is now portrayed as internal and spiritual. So again, even the Astro Twins are alluding to this war taking place, but as we see with this Piscean energy, and especially with the Jupiter and the Neptune dynamic with the Neptune opposition, this is having to do with our unconscious, our subconscious, our internal and spiritual worlds. So the Piscean age, is it the age of anxiety? Robert Fitzgerald says the internal focus of Pisces turned the old violence of Aries inward to the very heart of society. So the age before the Piscean age, 2100 years ago, again, because we're moving backwards through the zodiac when we're speaking to these ages, we were in Aries, which again was a very war-dominated time in history. And Robert Fitzgerald is suggesting that because we're now in Pisces, we have internalized this violence. And I feel that fear and anxiety is a way that we move this stress inwards. So my question and sort of thought for you all is, was the Cold War the rise of technocracy. So again, at the end of World War II, Saturn and Pluto conjunct, and it was the start of something. It might have been the end of World War II, but a conjunction is always the beginning of something. So was the Cold War the rise of this technocracy? Now, what is a technocracy? Technocracy is the government or control of society or industry by an elite of technical experts. Again, technical experts that no one necessarily voted for. And let me read you this quote. Whenever any person or group of persons in a position of great power and without full knowledge and consent of the public uses such knowledge and methodologies for economic conquest, it must be understood that a state of domestic warfare exists between said person or group of persons and the public. Now, this is taken from Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars, which, if you're not familiar with this, Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars, the story goes, it was a programming manual written in the early days of the Cold War, and it happened to be found by accident in an IBM copy machine in 1986. That's the story. I don't know, if that's true or not. But regardless, there's this piece of information that's basically, if you read it, and you can go, download it for free online. But it's basically calling for the control of the masses through manipulation. And it compares the human, the masses and how to manipulate the masses, similar to like the flow of electricity and how electric currents work and whatnot. It's an interesting read, whether you believe it's true or not, whatever you think it is, read it, and just read it is what my suggestion would be. Anyways, the goal of this manipulation is to divert people's attention from what's really going on. Pisces. We got a lot of Pisces here. Now, Joseph Stalin said this: America is like a healthy body, and its resistance is threefold: its patriotism, its morality, and its spiritual life. If we can undermine these three areas, America will collapse from within. Was and is that the goal? I think that is a good question to ponder. Now, on YouTube, there's a video called Mass Psychosis: How an Entire Population Becomes Mentally Ill. Again, thank you, my friend Kelly, for sending me this. Carl Jung said, "It is not famine, not earthquakes, not microbes, not cancer, but man himself who is man's greatest danger to man, for the simple reason that there is no adequate protection against psychic epidemics, which are infinitely more devastating than the worst of natural catastrophes." Well, what is a psychic epidemic? When mental illness becomes the norm, not the exception. And I think we only need to look around to see that. So what drives a person mad? From this video, and I highly encourage that you watch it, it's really well done. A person can go mad from excessive use of drugs and alcohol. Again, I talked about this with Pisces. Brain injury and other illnesses, psychogenic psychogenic triggers such as news, jabby jabbos, bioweapons, poisons, chemtrails, and heavy metals, or a flood of negative emotions such as fear that drives an individual into a state of panic. And if you're not looking at this photo, I encourage you look at this photo to get an idea of how such things could be accomplished. Why would we allow those things to happen? So Illuminati researcher Fritz Springmeier says the very life and liberty of humanity requires the unmasking of their deceptions. Honesty is a necessary ingredient for any society to function successfully. Deep breath. Is hope on the way? So we have a Jupiter-Neptune conjunction that will take place on and around April 8th through April 12th of 2022. This conjunction happens every 13 years, the first time to happen in Pisces since 1856. And the last Jupiter-Neptune conjunction was in 2009 at 23 degrees Aquarius. Now, typically, Jupiter-Neptune conjunctions are more of a positive dynamic. However, like I've said before in this talk, it's going to act upon and activate what is there. So it depends on what's there. So let's take a look at this a little bit more deeply. So Nikki Halstead says, are you tired of the same artists and Netflix shows on repeat? Are you a film enthusiast ready for a supercharged year for Hollywood blockbusters? Thankfully, this current pop culture plateau is the drum roll for an out of this world year for the arts and media. Because Jupiter and Neptune are both associated with cultural matters, it's safe to say a pop culture renaissance is underway. Now, the Jupiter-Neptune conjunction at 23 degrees Aquarius in 2009 has the Sabian symbol, which is basically each degree of the zodiac wheel has like an archetypal an archetype attached to each degree in each sign. So 23 degrees Aquarius is a bear sitting down and waving its paw. So Sabian symbols expert James Burgess says, by struggling to gain absolute mastery of our own lower nature, we find that nothing is beyond our capacity. It is pure nonsense to expect to reach high spiritual states without first coming to terms with ordinary life. And that also includes dealing with dark psychological imbalances we have inherited and internalized. So that is very appropriate. And let's look at 2009. Was that a futurist nightmare? We have Lady Gaga here, bloody. I don't even know what was happening. I think that was at the VMAs. She always seems to have blood and like meat associated with her. Is that an agenda? I'll let you decide. And then 2009 was the year at the VMAs that Taylor Swift got interrupted by Kanye when she was accepting her award. And again, it was sort of this bizarre situation. Was it a setup? Was it an act? What is going on with the shapes in Kanye's hair? Is that a message? I'm not sure, I don't know, but here's what was going on in 2009. Again, this was in Aquarius. Let's hope that Pisces is a little bit more loving. Now, here's what the Sabian symbol is for 23 Pisces, which we'll be experiencing in 2022. A materializing medium giving a seance. James Burgess says this: notice how people suffer and live in confusion. Our grasp on the nature of reality is a blend of the intuitive and the taught. And if we want to establish the truth of our unique take on life, then we have to substantiate that what we think or feel is true. So on that note, let's just go back to the character that is Kanye. So Vigilant Citizen wrote this article in 2020. He says, or he or she writes, Kanye West exposes dark truths about Kardashians, tries to break away from them. To put things in, this is from that article. To put things in context, we need to go back to 2016 when Kanye was forcefully handcuffed and hospitalized for quote unquote acting erratically. He was placed in 5150 hold, which is California law code for temporary involuntary psychiatric commitment of individuals who present a danger to themselves or others due to signs of mental illness. It should be noted that industry slaves, Britney Spears and Amanda Bynes, were both placed in 5150 hold at UCLA Medical Center. Now, again, in part one, I spoke about the Britney Spears being a manifestation of the Saturn Uranus squares. She's coming up again here. Now, between the time that I recorded part one and I'm recording this part two, Britney Spears has won her conservator case against her father. And I do believe that her, quote unquote, freedom now will be revealing a lot more than what we've already seen come out from her testimonies. And I'll also note that this article here at the top says, furthermore, several tweets of Kanye's allude to Hollywood's darkest secret, MK Ultra. If you're not familiar with MK Ultra, this is the Wikipedia definition, which I think is pretty accurate as far as my knowledge. MK Ultra was the code name of an illegal human experimentation program designed and undertaken by US CIA. These experiments were intended to develop procedures and identify drugs such as LSD that could be used in interrogations to weaken individuals and force confessions through brainwashing and psychological torture. MK Ultra used numerous methods to manipulate the subject's mental states and brain functions, such as the covert administration of high doses of psychoactive drugs like LSD, other chemicals, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, isolation, verbal and sexual abuse, and other forms of torture. So basically, this is still happening in Hollywood. We're starting to see it come out with the Pluto, all of the dynamics that we've been talking about, Pluto through Capricorn, the squares. But again, this is something that really happened, and it started taking place at the start of the Cold War, at the end of World War II. So I want to make sure that I'm connecting the dots here. Nikki Halstead says, Pisces is the sign associated with the past, dreams, cosmology, and spirituality. Rather than repeating 2009, there will be a renewed compassion from the public at large when reflecting on both the memories and nightmares of this time. 2009, while revolutionary, was a cutthroat and abusive year for those in the limelight. So the point that I'm trying to make by talking about MK Ultra, and again with what we've seen with Britney Spears, is that these are modern day slaves. These are victims. Pisces is about the victim. It's about suffering. And that even though we've been watching a show, we've been watching singing and dancing and, what have you, the reality of the situation was much different than what was being portrayed in the limelight. She goes on to say the world at large is mourning over a plethora of events and are ultimately looking to heal. It won't be all peaches and cream, but the cultural growth underway will show us, the people, just what we're made of. The key word of this transit is not salvation, but redemption. And I wanted to include the definition of the word redemption because it's so Piscean. The action of saving or being saved from sin, error, or evil. And they use the example, God's plans for the redemption of his world. The other interesting definition right under it, number 2, the action of regaining or gaining possession of something in exchange for payment or clearing a debt. Again, I find that very appropriate, but hopefully you'll see that as something that is uplifting about this time period being one of redemption. And let's hope that is true. And then last thing we'll talk about here is Jupiter's move into Aries from May 10th until October 27th of 2022. Then it's going to be retrograding back into Pisces, and then we'll move back into Aries, I believe, end of 2022 or beginning of 2023. Now, Jupiter in Aries is about a re-energized sense of self. So this is about Aries. It's about our identities, our personal selves. It is a time of being focused on ourselves as individuals and eager to satisfy the need for happiness. And it's helping us to move beyond our limits to realize the amount of opportunity that is available. Looking back to Jupiter and Aries back around 2010, 2011, we had the rise of the influencer. So I believe Instagram was created when Jupiter was retrograde in Pisces, but it had been in Aries. So there's definitely a connection with, selfies and Instagram and really promoting the self in this time period. And we'll see what this next iteration of that looks like. But if you're looking to do more self-promotion, this could be a great time for that. And I want to close with this idea too. When we're talking about Pisces and Virgo, again, opposites of each other, this is the 6th and the 12th house aspect, Virgo being 6th house, Pisces being 12th. Astrologer Robert Fitzgerald says this: to purify it, meaning spirit and ego, required a spiritual healing to release all of the collective fears, prejudices, and hatreds of humanity. This led to the insane violence of this age, alongside the rise of transcendental religions of belief and salvation. So what is real? What is unreal? And how are they connected? Does the solidity and apparent reality of the physical world require the heartfelt existence of the spiritual in order to exist? So these are deep questions that we are working through internally. And it comes down to this: don't hate, meditate. Robert Fitzgerald says it has been taught in all religions that through meditation and prayer, through humble service, and through moral purity, we open our minds and consciousness to the expansion of Pisces, to contact with heavenly worlds, bliss, and ecstasy. So if we want to get to the light side of Pisces, we have to evolve, and we have to work through all of the shadow sides that we've talked about. So that is the end of part 2. I want to thank you so much for being here with me for part 2. I want to again invite you to this webinar special that I'm offering, a life purpose astrology reading, where you can explore your personality from a soul level. You'll get an understanding of your mission, gifts, and talents in this lifetime, learn how to address and overcome obstacles related to karma, unconscious blocks, and even possibly past lives or family dynamics. All of this can be yours in a 45-minute recorded audio reading that I will do for you and send over to you. Plus, you get a free 30-minute follow-up call with me if you so choose to ask any questions or get any clarification. I'm offering a special of $99 for this. And here's, a testimonial here on the screen. So if you are interested, email me at kristen@kristenavalos.com. Include your date of birth, time of birth, and location of birth, and I will email you your personalized reading within 3 to 7 days of receiving payment. So again, that webinar special is $99. I would love to connect with you and read your chart and get to know you on that level. Don't miss part 3. I will be recording that. I'm still finishing up the slides for that, so it might not be right away. Be sure to watch part 1 if you haven't already. Watch it again. You might gain some new insights. Watch part 2 again. Watch them together. Let me know what your comments are. Share it with anyone you think would be interested in learning more. Like it, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel. You can subscribe to my email list, which is very helpful for me to be able to connect and keep you posted on all of my latest videos and meditations. Thank you again. I look forward to seeing you in part 3. Bye.